Welcome back to OllieKayPolitical. This is episode 6, and welcome to the Polish Hell. If you've been listening since the beginning, we've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at the maps that define our geopolitics. We've analyzed the betrayals of 1939 and 1944. We've even looked at the incredible economic engine that Poland has become. But today, we have to stop looking outward. We have to stop looking at Berlin, Moscow, and Washington. We have to look in the mirror. There is a term in our language that doesn't translate perfectly into English. Piekło Polskie, Polish hell. It's not a tumultuous, fiery place from the Bible. It's a psychological state. It refers to Poles' unique, almost supernatural ability to destroy each other from within, usually just as we are about to succeed. It is the crab bucket mentality. If one Pole tries to climb out, the others will pull him back down. Today, we are going to talk about the political manifestation of this hell. We are going to talk about the duopoly, the eternal, paralyzing war between the two giants, Prawo I Sprawiedliwość, law and justice, and Koalicja Obywatelska, civic coalition. To an outsider, the situation looks like normal democracy. You have a right wing and a centrist wing. This system resembles the Republicans and Democrats in the US, as well as the Tories and Labour in the UK. But if you live here, you know it's different. It's not just political. It's tribal. It's visceral. It splits families at the Christmas table. It makes neighbors stop talking to each other. It's a cold civil war where the ammunition isn't bullets, but accusations of treason. And the best proof is to look at our media right now. For 8 years, we believed that TVP served as the spokesperson for PS. Now, the power has changed hands. The coalition of Donald Tusk has taken over. And what happened? TVP has fundamentally changed the narrative. Now, TVP, along with TVN, supports the current government narrative. Meanwhile, the PIS electorate has migrated to Telewizja Republika and TV Trum, where they hear that the country is being sold to Germany and the rule of law is being destroyed. There is no middle ground. There is no debate. There is only the trench. And while we are busy fighting in this trench, shooting at our brothers, the world is moving on. Our enemies are watching, and they are laughing. In this episode, we are going to do a deep autopsy of this conflict. We are going to prove that this didn't start in 2015 with Kaczynski and Tusk. We are going to trace the roots back to the 1990s, to the forgotten war between AWS and SLD. We are going to dig even deeper, to the golden age of the 17th century, to understand why we have a historical tendency to invite foreign powers to solve our internal disputes. We will also look at the underdog, Konfederacja. Could they be the third force capable of upending the system, now that they have shed their most controversial exterior? And finally, I am going to propose a radical solution. I believe this system is the only way to heal a nation as stubborn and independent as ours. We need to look south, to the Alps. We need to talk about the Swiss model. So, grab a strong coffee. Perhaps you could opt for something more robust. We are diving into the pit. The origin story. AWS versus SLD. Many young Poles, Gen Z, young millennials, think the Polish War started in 2005. They think it's always been Kaczor, Kaczynski, versus Donald, Tusk. But to understand the duopoly, you have to go back to the chaos of the 1990s. The devastation of communism had just begun to subside. The Soviet troops were leaving, and the political scene was a Wild West. In the late 90s, the duopoly wore different masks. We didn't yet have peace on the right. We had a monster called AWS, Akcja Wyborcza Solidarność, Solidarity Electoral Action. Imagine a coalition of 30 or 40 different right-wing parties, trade unions, Catholic groups, and anti-communists, all glued together by one man, Marian Krzaklewski. Krzaklewski is a name many have forgotten, but he was the prototype for the backseat driver. He wasn't the prime minister. He put a mild-mannered professor, Jerzy Buzek, in that seat. However, it was widely known that Krzaklewski held the power. It was the exact same model Jarosław Kaczyński would use years later. On the left, we had the SLD, Sojusz Lewicy Demokratycznej. These were the post-communists. These were the individuals who had previously governed the country prior to 1989, but they had now reinvented themselves as modern social democrats. They were led by the smooth, charismatic President Aleksander Kwaśniewski and the Iron Chancellor Leszek Miller. The war between AWS and SLD was brutal. AWS viewed SLD as traitors who had served Moscow. SLD viewed AWS as religious fanatics and incompetents. Who was caught in the middle? This is the tragic part of the story. There was a party called Unia Wolności, Freedom Union. These were the intellectuals, the architects of the economic transformation. Leszek Balcerowicz, Bronisław Geremek, and Tadeusz Mazowiecki. They aspired to be the adults in the room. They aimed to serve as the bridge. They governed with AWS, trying to modernize the country. And what happened to them? They were devoured by the duopoly. They were squeezed out. The polarization became so strong that there was no room for a center. You had to be with the revolution or against it. By 2001, Unia Wolności, the party of the first non-communist prime minister, failed to even enter parliament. This is the lesson of Polish history. The center does not hold. The gravity of the two tribes crushes everything in between. AWS eventually collapsed under its infighting. From its ashes rose two new parties, Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, PiS, and Platforma Obywatelska, PO. In 2005, they were actually supposed to form a coalition. They called it POPIS. They promised a fourth republic to clean up the corruption of the post-communists. But they couldn't agree on who would be Speaker of the Sejm. They couldn't agree on the ministries. The coalition died before it was born. And in that moment, the cold civil war we are living in today began. The two brothers became enemies, and they forced every Pole to pick a side. The deep roots, Golden Age, and Targowica. But if we are really honest, this didn't start in the 90s. This dysfunction is written into our DNA. we have to look back to the golden age of the 16th and 17th centuries. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. We were a superpower. We held Moscow. We stopped the Ottomans. We established a democracy among the nobility, while the rest of Europe was ruled by absolute tyrants. But we had a fatal flaw. The Magnates, the Potockis, the Radziwiłłs, the Sapiehas, the Lubomirskis. These families were so powerful, they treated the Polish state not as a motherland, but as a private resource. These families used the Polish state as a strategic tool to further their own ambitions. They formed factions. They paralyzed the same with the Liberum Veto, the right of a single nobleman to stand up and shout, "I do not allow," dissolving the parliament and cancelling all laws passed in that session. And when they couldn't win domestically, when a magnate felt he was losing influence to the king or a rival family, he did the unthinkable. He called for foreign help. He would write a letter to the Tsar of Russia, or the King of Prussia, or the Emperor of Austria. He would say, "My liberties are being threatened. Help me defeat my rival, and I will be your loyal friend." The Confederation of Targowica in 1792 was the ultimate expression of this. Polish nobles asking Catherine the Great of Russia to invade Poland to restore freedom and protect their privileges. Now, look at our politicians. Does it not feel the same? When the right is in power, the left runs to Brussels and Berlin, shouting, "Democracy's dying! Punish the Polish government! Cut the funds!" When the left is in power, the right runs to Washington or conservative media in the West, shouting, "Sovereignty is being sold! We are becoming a German colony! Help us!" We are still doing it. We are still the magnates, treating our internal disputes as something that requires foreign intervention. We treat foreign powers as mentors or sponsors. We act like a client state, not a sovereign one. We should strive to govern our motherland ourselves. We should lock the doors, close the curtains, and have the argument in Polish, in Warsaw. This should not take place in Strasbourg, Berlin, or Washington, D.C. Every time we invite a foreign power to adjudicate our disputes, we lose a piece of our independence. The cost: inconsistent defense and audit mania. You might ask, "Ollie, who cares? Politics is always messy. Why does it matter?" It matters because this war has a cost. The currency of this war is our national security. In serious countries, countries that plan to survive the next century, foreign policy and defense are sacred. They are bipartisan. In the UK, the government changes from Conservative to Labour, but the nuclear submarines keep patrolling. In the US, the president changes, but the aircraft carrier procurement plan remains largely untouched. In Poland, we approach the modernization of our military as a political matter. Every new government views the contracts signed by their predecessors not as state obligations, but as crimes that require investigation. Let's look at the Caracal helicopters. In 2015, the PO government selected the French Airbus Caracal to replace our aging Soviet fleet. It was a signed deal. Factories were being prepped in Łódź. Then PIS won the election. And what did they do? They didn't just renegotiate. They famously cancelled the contract virtually overnight. The French were furious. President Hollande cancelled his visit. We lost credibility as a business partner. And the result? For years, our special forces flew in aging equipment while politicians argued. Now, fast forward to today. The roles have reversed. The PIS government, panicked by the war in Ukraine, signed massive contracts with South Korea. Hundreds of K-2 tanks, K-9 howitzers, and FA-50 jets. It was the biggest rearmament drive in Europe. Then the government changed. The new KO-led coalition comes in. And what is the first word we hear? Audit. They say, we need to check the financing. Maybe we don't need 500 launchers. Maybe the loans are too expensive. I'm not saying audits are harmful. Transparency is beneficial. But when audit becomes a code word for delay or cancellation, just to spite the previous guys, it is dangerous. We see the same thing with the Gawron corvette. The Polish Navy has abandoned the Gawron corvette. The project began under the leadership of the left, SLD, in 2001, continued by PIS, paused by PO because we don't need a large navy, then restarted. It took 18 years to build one ship. It was supposed to be a deadly corvette. It ended up as the ORP Schlongzak, a patrol vessel with barely any armament. It is the most expensive speedboat in history. Why? Because no single government could commit to finishing what their rivals started. And don't even get me started on the CPK. This mega airport project is crucial for NATO logistics and Polish trade. But because it was the flagship project of PIS, the new government treats it like a toxic waste dump. This is madness. You cannot build a Fortress Poland if every 4 years you tear up the blueprints and fire the architect. Our allies and our enemies in Moscow look at us and wonder, can we trust the signature from Warsaw? Will it be valid after the next election? Consistent foreign policy is the hallmark of a mature state. We are exhibiting behavior akin to a teenager who alters their personality with each change in their social circle. Defense must be sacred. It must be off limits to the duopoly. The Underdog, the new Confederacja. So, is there an alternative? Is there a way out of the binary trap? For years, the political graveyard was full of parties that tried to break the duopoly. Remember Cookies 15? Remember Nowoczesna? Palikot? They all flared up like fireworks and burned out just as fast. But there is one survivor. The third force, Confederacja. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're picturing the old Confederacja. You're picturing the memes. You're picturing men in bow ties talking about destroying the European Union while eating sushi. You're picturing the crazy uncles. For a long time, Confederacja was its own worst enemy. They had a glass ceiling of about 7 to 8% support because, quite frankly, they scared normal people. They were dragged down by two massive anchors. First, Janusz Korwin-Mikke, the patriarch of the Polish right. He was a man of undeniable intelligence, yet he lacked any political filter. Every time the party gained momentum, Korwin would go on television and say something outrageous about women or Putin or Hitler, and the polls would crash. He was the king of self-sabotage. Second, Grzegorz Braun. He viewed the Sejm not as a parliament, but rather as a platform for his religious crusade. We all remember the fire extinguisher incident during Hanukkah. To his hardcore base, he was a hero. However, was he a hero to the moderate businessman in Poznań or the student in Warsaw? He was a lunatic. You cannot win an election with these guys in the front row. You can make noise, but you cannot govern. And this is where the story gets captivating. The new guard of Confederacja acted with ruthlessness. They realized that to survive, they had to kill the fathers. Watch what happened in 2023 and 2024. It was a political assassination executed in broad daylight. Korwin was pushed off the chessboard. First, they hid him during the campaign. Then, after he sabotaged them again, they suspended him. Now, he is effectively a retiree, ranting on the sidelines, trying to start fringe parties like Cobra that go nowhere. The king is dead. And Braun? They handled him even more cleverly. They didn't lay him off, they promoted him. They sent him to Brussels. They exported him to the European Parliament. It was the classic golden exile. He gets to make his speeches in the EU, he gets his salary, but he's thousands of kilometers away from the Polish Sejm. He can no longer derail their domestic strategy. With the anchors cut loose, who is steering the ship? The duo. The CEO and the statesman. Sławomir Mentzen and Krzysztof Bosak. Let's look at Mentzen. He is the CEO of the New Right. He is a tax advisor, a businessman, and a brewery owner. He understands the language of money. He doesn't talk about religious wars. He talks about the 900 pages of the tax code that destroy small businesses. He is the TikTok king of Polish politics. He realized before anyone else that the battle for the young voter isn't happening on TVP, it's happening on a 6-inch phone screen. His message is seductive in its simplicity. You work hard, the state steals your money, and I will stop it. It appeals to the young professionals, the IT specialists, and the entrepreneurs who feel suffocated by the welfare state of peace and the bureaucracy of PO. Then you have Bosak. If Mentzen is the brain, Bosak has become the face. 10 years ago, he was the boy from the nationalist movement, famous for appearing on Dancing with the Stars. Today, he has undergone a shocking transformation. As the vice marshal of the Sejm, he has become respectable. Watch him in the debates. He is calm. He is articulate. He wears perfectly tailored suits. He doesn't scream. When he debates the foreign minister or the prime minister about EU treaties or the Green Deal, he often looks like the most prepared person in the room. He has successfully rebranded nationalism as assertive sovereignty. He makes the radical sound reasonable. This combination, the libertarian CEO and the nationalist statesman, is dangerous for the duopoly. They provide comprehensive coverage. Mentzen takes the economy. Bosak takes on culture and foreign policy. They are no longer trying to overturn the table, as they used to shout. Now they want to sit at the table. They may even aspire to sit at the head of the table. They are positioning themselves as the only adults in the room. While peace screams about German agents and KO screams about authoritarianism, Confederacja sits back and says, "Look at them. They are hysterical. We are talking about your taxes, your car, your house, and your army." But there is a trap. The duopoly knows this, and they are waiting. They are waiting for the friction between Mentzen's libertarians and Bosak's nationalists to explode. Can a party that wants to abolish taxes coexist with a party that wants a strong nationalistic state? Can the TikTokers get along with the Crusaders. So far, the discipline is holding. They are polling steadily in double digits. They are the third force. And in a parliament where peace and KO are locked in a stalemate, the third force is the kingmaker. The duopoly used to laugh at them. They aren't laughing anymore. Confederacja is the underdog that stopped barking and started biting. The solution: the Swiss model. I promised you a solution. I don't just want to complain about the duopoly for 40 minutes. I want to offer a way out. I believe the best political system in the world, and the only one that can truly cure the Polish mental illness we call the duopoly, is Switzerland. Now, stop rolling your eyes. I know what you're thinking. Ollie, Switzerland is boring. They just have chocolate, banks, and mountains. They are rich and neutral. We are the Christ of nations. We suffer. We fight. Exactly. The Swiss model is considered boring because it functions effectively. They don't have civil wars because they engineered a system that makes them impossible. Why is the Swiss model perfect for Poland? Because deep down, Poles and Swiss people share the most important character trait of all. We hate being told what to do. We cherish our independence. We are suspicious of centralized power. We are stubborn. So, how exactly does the Swiss system fix the Polish hell? Let's break it down into 3 specific mechanisms. Mechanism 1: the 7-headed president, the Federal Council. Quick, tell me, who is the president of Switzerland? You don't know. Most Swiss people don't even know. That's the point. They don't have a savior. They lack a leader like Tusk or Kaczynski, who holds total power and demonizes the opposing half of the country. They have the Federal Council, Bundesrat. It consists of 7 members, not 1. 7. And here's the genius part. They use something called the magic formula. Unwritten rule divides these 7 seats among the 4 largest parties in parliament. So the socialists, conservatives, liberals, and populists all share a cabinet. Imagine that in Poland. Imagine a cabinet where a PIS minister, a KO minister, a Konfederacja minister, and a Lewica minister have to sit in the same room every Wednesday morning. And they cannot leave the room until they agree on a solution. What happens if they are unable to reach a consensus? Nothing happens. The status quo remains. This procedure forces them to talk. It forces them to compromise. It kills the winner-takes-all mentality because nobody takes it all. In Poland, when you win an election, you take 100% of the power with 35% of the vote. You fire everyone, you purge the media, and you change the school books. In Switzerland, you win an election and you get 1 extra seat at the table of 7. You still have to work with your enemies. Mechanism 2: the nuclear option. This is the most important part. In Poland, we live in an elected monarchy. Once we elect a government, they are kings for 4 years. They can pass laws we hate. They can raise taxes. They can buy limousines. And we can only shout on Facebook or freeze at a protest. In Switzerland, the politicians are employees. The people are the boss, and the boss has a veto. It's called the facultative referendum. If the parliament in Bern passes a stupid law, say a new tax you don't like, or a restriction on internet freedom, the citizens have 100 days. If they can gather 50,000 signatures in a country of 8 million, they trigger a national vote. If the people vote no, the law is dead. It goes into the trash. The Prime Minister can cry, the Parliament can scream, but the people have spoken. Think about how this legislation changes the psychology of a politician. In Poland, politicians are arrogant because they know they are safe for 4 years. In Switzerland, politicians are humble. They are terrified. They know that if they pass something radical, the people will humiliatingly strike it down. Therefore, what do? They compromise before they pass the law. They ask the unions, the businesses, and the citizens, "Is this okay? Will you veto this?" It creates stability through fear of the people. And if you want to change the country, you have the popular initiative. Gather 100,000 signatures, and you can propose an amendment to the Constitution. The people vote. If they say yes, the government must do it. Mechanism 3. Radical decentralization, cantons versus Warsaw. Poland is sick with Warsaw centrism. Why should a bureaucrat in Warsaw decide the school curriculum for a Kasubian village? Why should the capital decide exactly how Silesia spends its money? Switzerland is a federation of cantons. Cantons are not just provinces, they are almost sovereign states. They set their own tax rates. They run their police. They decide their own holidays. If one canton wants to be socialist and high tax, they can be. The neighbor can be low tax and libertarian if they so choose. This lowers the temperature. If you hate the policies in Geneva, you can move to Zug. In Poland, if you hate the government in Warsaw, you have nowhere to go. That's why we fight so hard, because the winner in Warsaw puts their boot on the neck of the whole country. The counter-argument: Poles are too stupid. Now, I hear the critics. The elites in Warsaw will say, "Ollie, this is dangerous. Poles are not Swiss. We are emotional. We are chaotic. If you give Poles direct democracy, they will vote to abolish taxes and give everyone free beer. The country will collapse." This is the arrogance of the Enlightenment. It is the argument of the Targowica traitor that the mob cannot be trusted, so we need a wise king or a foreign power to rule us. I reject that. People behave irresponsibly when they have no responsibility. If you treat citizens like children who can only vote once every 4 years, they will act like children. They will vote for whoever promises the most free candy. But if you treat citizens like adults, if you tell them, "You hold the checkbook. If you cast your vote in favor of this, your taxes will increase next month," they escalate rapidly. Look at our history. Look at the Sejmiki of the 16th century. We invented this kind of local democracy before the Swiss did. We had the concept of nothing about us without us. The Magnates stole that from us. They corrupted it. The Swiss model is just the fixed version of the old Polish noble democracy extended to every citizen. Conclusion on the solution. The Swiss system is slow. It is frustrating. It takes years to build a tunnel or change a law. But fast politics gave us the chaos of the last 8 years. Fast politics gave us the Caracal cancellation and the abortion war. Maybe we need slow. Maybe we need a system where you have to sit down with your enemy and convince them, rather than just destroying them. We are a proud, independent nation. We fought for centuries to be free. Why, now that we are free, do we hand over our freedom to party bosses who treat us like voting cattle? The duopoly will never provide us this system. They lose their power if they do. We have to demand it. The maturity test. So, we have been down in the pit for 40 minutes. We have dissected the corpse of the duopoly. We have looked at the ghosts of AWS and SLD. We have looked at the helicopter deals torn up and the tanks audited. What is the verdict? The verdict is that Poland is facing its final test. We have passed the test of survival. We survived the Germans, we survived the Soviets, we survived the poverty of the 90s. But now we face the test of maturity. A mature nation does not need a big brother to tell it how to run its parliament. A mature nation does not need to run to Berlin to complain about the rule of law, or run to Washington to complain about the media. That is the behavior of a colony. That is the behavior of a vassal. That is the ghost of Targowica, still haunting us 200 years later. Every time a Polish politician, from the left or the right, stands on a podium in a foreign capital and asks for intervention against his domestic rivals, he is spitting on the graves of the people who died for our sovereignty. He is saying, "We are incapable of governing ourselves. Please, come and rule us." We have to stop this. The duopoly thrives on your fear. Peace wants you to be afraid that without them, Poland will become a German state. KO wants you to be afraid that without them, Poland will become a Russian dictatorship. Every 4 years, they urge you to cast your vote for the less severe form of evil. I am telling you, stop voting for evil. Evil is still evil, even if it is lesser. We need to demand a system that respects us. The Swiss model isn't just a political structure. It's a mirror. It asks us, are you ready to take responsibility? Are you ready to vote on your taxes? Are you ready to veto your government? Are you ready to accept that your neighbor has a different opinion, and instead of calling him a traitor, you have to sit down and compromise with him? Some say that Confederacja is the answer. Maybe they are. They are certainly the only ones trying to break the binary code. Their professionalization, the Mentzen and Bosak strategy, shows that there is a hunger for something that isn't just peace. But even they are just a party. And parties eventually disappoint you. Changing the game's rules is the real solution. We need to decentralize. We need referendums. We must return power to the Sejmiki, the regions, and the people, not the palaces in Warsaw. We survived the partitions because we kept the Polish spirit alive in our homes when the state didn't exist. Now that the state does exist, let's not let the politicians turn it into their private playground. Let's govern our motherland. Let's stop listening to the whispers of the embassies. Let's close the door, sit at the table, and argue in Polish. For Poland. Thank you for listening to episode 6. This was a heavy one, but it had to be said. Next time on OllieKayPolitical. We are done playing with small toys. Next time, we are going to talk about the ultimate insurance policy. We live next to a bear that understands only one language: force. Is Article 5 enough? Is NATO enough? Or is it time for Poland to stop asking for permission and start printing its own security? We are going to discuss the most controversial, taboo, and necessary idea in European geopolitics: why Poland needs its own nuclear missiles. Can Warsaw become the atomic guarantor of peace in the East? Can we become the regional powerhouse that balances the Russian threat with cold nuclear steel? Join us for Episode 7, The Atom, Poland's Nuclear Option. Until then, stay free, stay skeptical, and remember, the politician is the employee. You are the boss. Act like it. See you next time.